So are we muting when we're not talking, Catherine, or?
I was just gonna.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Good afternoon. We are so excited to be able to present our Lyon and Healy Harptacular San Francisco live Q&A. My name is Heather Azum. I'm the concert hall manager at Lyon and Healy Harps, and I'll be your host today. We are joined directly from our homes with Emmanuel Saison, our guest artist.
Hi, everyone.
Our national sales manager, Catherine Denler, Oliver.
Hey.
And our music publications director, Dr. Jordan Chua. Thank you all for being here, taking the time out of your day. For those watching, I hope you have enjoyed our presentation so far, and we're just happy to have you here with us and be able to present this little portion live with you. The way today will work is you can type your questions in the YouTube live chat. We will try to get to as many as we can. And if we don't, for whatever reason, we will get back to you. We'll put a document together that will be emailed out to all of our registrants with answers to questions we may not have been able to get to. So we're going to go ahead and start. I think we're all excited to hear from Emmanuel, and maybe if you could talk about what you've done in quarantine, how your move went, what life in LA is like, all of that good stuff.
So, I mean, speaking about quarantine right now is not going to be the perfect joyful subject, but yes, it's good that we that we spend a minute speaking about that, because I think it has been a terrible period for all the artists, all the harpists, the performing people on the planet. This has been a very tough year. For us at the Met, it started with a very dark news, like we went dark mid-March last year, and then it was followed by, like, as you know, a full season that was dark. So luckily for me, I had gotten the job at the Los Angeles Philharmonic. I won the audition in October of 2019. So I already knew I was gonna move to Los Angeles. So for me, I had this to be looking forward to in a way, and I feel very blessed and lucky to have had that in a way to keep also busy and like the hope for getting back to work sooner than later. So yes, my husband and I moved from New York to Los Angeles over the summer, and I started to work like with the orchestra in August. We did a couple of videos first, with the Gustavo like orchestra. The big chance we have here in Los Angeles is there is the Hollywood Bowl. Hollywood Bowl is an outside venue, so it's better for the security purposes, and for the sanitary purposes, like so that you don't put your colleagues at risk, of course. But it was a very we had to get tested very often, and it was really complicated. But we did the best out of it, I think. So we had like a few weeks of work from August to now, and now we are really about to start working again, which is really exciting. We just announced yesterday there was a press release about the Hollywood Bowl season starting on the third week of July. And with limited gauge, but at least I think 4,000 people admitted. So being able to play in front of a live audience again is going to be definitely like my highlight of this year. Because it's fun to make videos, like you could see I had fun making mine today, but still, like it's you lose something where you are not performing in front of a live audience. And I think we all need that, like, because our job is about communicating emotions, beauty, art, music to people who are in front of us. And when you are behind a camera, it's very different, and it's very challenging actually to find purpose in your life only recording yourself. I mean, we could also speak about the fact of recording. Recording yourself is a very tough process, something we are not used to. And for example, like, a lot of competitions like the AHS, for example, have gone online. There are discussions about Israel, part of the competition being online, if they cannot, safely have people coming to the country. All of this is very challenging for students or people getting ready for competition, because they have to record themselves in one shot, and it's really tough, like, because when you have a microphone in front of you, you don't play the same. it's not like playing in front of an audience. You don't have the adrenaline. You only have. It's like I would say. I make the analogy sitting in the couch of a psychoanalyst. You have the microphone and he's like a shrink, listening to you and not saying anything. And so basically you are listening to yourself in this very terribly judging way, and it's very hard to pass this step. So I am really admirative of all of the students doing the hard work of recording themselves for the competition, this online competition. It's really tough, and I really give them the thumbs up because it has been a terrible period for them. And so I say bravo to them for all of those that are doing this effort, and we are getting back there, guys. Just hang on tight, hang in tight.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds, I know that it's been so challenging for so many of us, and to understand the new technology and being able to use it correctly I think has been very difficult for so many people.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so we've gotten one question. Actually, we've gotten a lot of feedback. A lot of people are super excited. They have enjoyed our presentation, which is so wonderful to hear. We had a comment that they especially loved your pedal cam. Can you tell us a little bit about how you set that up?
Yeah, so the idea, I wanted to do, for all the music videos, I really wanted to present them for harpists, not only like just a little bit of music played in one single shot. So I had two cameras filming me, facing me. So I had like one regular camera and then my iPhone to have like a close shot angle and one a little further away. And I had my GoPro, which is like a very tiny camera set on the floor just behind my feet. And so recording all of my moves, and then I picked the most like interesting ones, because sometimes you get a long time without playing any pedals and you don't want to see like a fixed image. It's not really interesting. So I really chose the most interesting passage to like add them on the far right corner of the screen, and then so that people could see also the pedal moves. I think it's interesting.
That's very cool. It's a very cool just way that you can do that, and to have the multiple cameras, I'm sure, is a challenge, and to learn how to use that was a challenge. Yeah.
Because also I was using an iPhone. The iPhone is great because it has mine had a lot of space, so I could go for like long stretches of time. But one of my other cameras is what is called a vlog camera, so it stops every 25 minutes. And sometimes you are in the middle of recording something, you are doing great, and you hear beep, 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 and you're like, it's like but it was challenging, and actually I learned a lot about video editing, these kind of things, to make it work. But it was, in the end, I think I tried to present it as interestingly possible for people to watch. Yeah. Absolutely.
It was so fun to watch. I can say that for myself. It was great. Okay, so Emmanuel, what is your absolute favorite piece to perform?
I don't know. I think it evolves through time, so I cannot give you a straight answer. When I remember just outside of the conservatoire after winning Bloomington, I think my first taste went to Tournier and the Sonatine. Sonatine Opus 30 was one of my favorite. And then my taste evolved after I joined the orchestra, things like this. I had a favorite, the Faust Fantasy, by Zabel on the Gounod's opera's Faust. I played that very fondly for a few years. And now, of course, you can see I played a lot of Renier. I really think that in Renier's works, I would go for the pièce symphonique now. I am having a lot of inspiration playing this piece. I think it's really a beautiful work, very diverse, and also it displays it used the harp in such a smart way. So now I would say at the moment I am very much working on Renier, and this pièce symphonique is one of my favorite pieces.
Very nice. Works that you're working on right now by Renier? Is there anything else you're playing that you haven't played for us yet?
Well, not really. There were these new pieces that I presented, like the Morning Waltz, that are very rare. I had to have someone go to the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris to get them out for me, because they are not edited anymore. So someone went there, get them out, make copies, send them to me, and then I could like access. And it was very exciting for me to learn this music that I didn't know that she had written, especially because there are pieces that are not so well played. She recorded one of them. She recorded the second one in an historical recording, but that's the only trace we have from the piece. So it was a lot of fun to look for. And then I am working, actually, I am learning new concertos that I have not played before at the moment. I am learning the Taillefer concertino, Germaine Taillefer, that I'm going to perform next season, 2022, in Switzerland. And also I am doing like reworking on the Concerto Serenata by Rodrigo. I had played bits of it, but never the full thing, and this is for the Lake Tahoe Festival in Incline Village in Nevada this summer, end of July normally. Yeah.
I love that you're playing the Taillefer. Wasn't that composed in New York? Is that right?
You know more than I do. I thought it was composed in 1920, the end of the 20s, I think.
27 or 28, I think.
Yes.
I think it was.
When she was in New York?
She was in New York at the time, I believe.
But for me, it's like, I listened, of course, to the recording by Zabaleta. Zabaleta made the recording with the Orchestre National de France. And it's amazing to see how close to Stravinsky this music is. Like the influence of Stravinsky is very present, and I don't think it's the grown-up language of Taillefer will come later. There are still a lot of influences that you can feel that she was like really imbued with like the sound of the ballet russe and Stravinsky. I personally find that, but that's a great piece and that's rarely performed. I also think it's rarely performed because the balanced orchestra harp is not super well thought out. So I am actually thinking of playing it with amplification so that people can, because sometimes like it's really the way it's written, it's really a piano-like composition, I think. So maybe on the piano it would work better, but for the harp I am thinking of amplifying actually, because it's going to be drawn in the orchestra if not.
That'll be in Switzerland. You're going to play that?
Switzerland, yeah, a winter tour, so it's close to Zurich. Musikkollegium Winter Tour, and I think so it's going to be, if I'm not mistaken, April of 2022.
Very cool. Questions are coming in fast and furious. All for Emmanuel. Again, we are, sorry, it moved. Talking about Henriette Renier and how we are very defined by the teachers or traditions of teaching. Could you speak about the evolution or current state of harp pedagogy?
Do they mean in the US or in France? Because it's very different.
Let's say in the US.
Okay. So, I have seen, I can only compare on a couple of dozens of years, because my first actually visit to the United States was in 2004. And I think I gave my first classing in the US, master classes with the AHS, sometimes in 2006, 2007. And I was very surprised to see the big separation in technical schools, like, the Salcedo School and the Grangiani School. Because in France, there is not really such thing. Like we have the French, in France, when you learn at the Paris Conservatoire, you have like this big French tradition that actually flows all the way from Asselmans, who was not French but Belgian, but Asselmans, Renier, Tournier, Tournier, then Lily Laskin, who was professor after him, and then Jacqueline Borot, of course Germaine Lorenzini, and Isabelle Moretti. Marie-Claire Jamet, of course, also. So in France, there was a little bit of a schism, like a separation between Jamet and Renier. They were not completely like aligned technically, but still, like now, it's really, the lines are very blurred in France. In the US in 2006, it was still very, very different. But now that I am back here and I have been living here for 6 years, I also think that the lines are blurring. You have some people that are still very traditionalist in their view of the technique, but most of it now, it's most about, and what I think is the most important, is serving the music. And I think like choosing a team like Salcedo team or Grangiani team does not really have a meaning today anymore, in my opinion. I think what should matter is the sound production, the result you get in the technique that allows you to produce a beautiful sound, and then to go in the music, like to find sounds and definition and meaning to the music itself. through sound production and technique. But so yes, I feel that the lines are a little more blurred now than it was 20 years ago, in my opinion, and I think it's a great thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely coming to age, so to speak. Yeah. Okay, so next we have questions for Dr. Jordan. How does music, it says music score, but maybe she means Fourscore, compare to Finale for composing purposes?
Okay. Well, MuseScore and Finale, Sibelius, they have a lot of things that coincide. They're all typesetting tools. They're all tools that do playback. However, MuseScore, from my understanding, is you can have more of a subscription basis to that. And Finale probably has a bit more power, you could say, some more flexibility, especially if you are creating harp technique symbols or any symbols in music, really. So MuseScore, however, on the practicality purpose, may be a bit more accessible to people as far as price point and usability. Finale, which is really great, also can be a bit daunting and has a bit of a learning curve to it. So MuseScore, if you're doing some everyday things, especially in your studio or you're creating worksheets and such for your students, or even just cleaning up stuff for yourself that you hand wrote, MuseScore actually works quite well. So in the end of all things, a lot of these they're different companies, or I could say different groups that offer different platforms for whatever your needs may be. So depending on your capability of using these things, MuseScore may be more accessible than Sibelius or Finale, or MuseScore may not be able to handle what you want, so you may want to go to Finale or Sibelius.
Thank you so much. Coming back to Emmanuel, do you have any favorite warm-ups and conditioning exercises? And along with that, what is your practice regimen?
Well, I don't really have a particular warm-up routine. Usually I warm up slowly on the piece I'm gonna start with, my practice session with, sorry. I was never, look, in all of my life with the harp and my learning experience, I was really never practicing the technique separately from the music. Of course, I played a couple of studies, like Pozzoli when I was very young, but most of my technical approach, and especially when I redid completely my technique when I was 15 with Madame Lorenzini, with Germaine Lorenzini in Lyon, we always would stay on very, very specific technical examples from the music, and we would not go to a particular study particular study or book of exercises. So for me, warming up is mostly about getting the hand working, and so I depending on what I'm gonna do, I pick up the music I'm gonna practice later on. A good exercise also for young students, if I have an opinion about that, is to start their warming up with orchestra parts that are like technically interesting, like for example the Swan Lake or the Nutcracker. Why is that? It's because at some point in your life you will all have to play orchestra auditions, and so manipulating these excerpts in the morning as the first thing you go on the harp is going to make you more used to them and maybe a little less afraid of them. If you kind of get them in your morning routine, like the Cadenza, or Swan Lake or Nutcracker, then you are going to be less afraid of them in an audition, I think. And it's also always good to have some arpeggio practice in your warm-up, because all the fingers are used and you go through the whole harp, and so those are particularly comfortable, I would say, to start a practice day. Then my routine. Well, I don't really have a routine per se. I count in time of practice during the day. COVID has been particularly challenging, So I had to organize, like force myself to have like a regular schedule during the day. So what I would do is I would start around 10 a.m. With so usually like learning new music. I start with that because I like to use my fresh brain time, like when the brain is still like has a lot of capacity to go through new things, so that I try to learn them as fast as I can. I am also very eager to learn to memorize things very fast when I learn. So that's why when I start my day, I go on new music usually, and so I do like 1 hour of learning new stuff, and after that I usually take a break. I like to take breaks very often to also like not get too tired, and I'm doing around 3 to 4 hours a day of practice in 3 to 4 sessions basically, and then so after this first hour where I really reserve for new music, then it's more about polishing or rereading things that I will have to perform soon, and yeah, doing like really detailed work. Like I don't really play through when I am in my practice time. I go to specific places and I try to polish them as much as I can, and then I integrate them in a little bigger section. It's how I work, and that's it. So that's my practice is 3-4 hours a day, cut in sessions of 1 hour.
That's some dedication you have. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Okay, so now a little bit of a deeper question. This person is thanking you for talking about Regnier's Catholic faith and asking, what part does your belief in God or a higher power influence your performing emotional expression as a harpist?
It's a very good question. I think there are different steps. Personally, I am an atheist. How do you say that? I grew up in a family that was, French, very Republican in the French way. I'm sorry, not the American way, but like we were very attached to the value of the French Republic and things like this. So I didn't grow up going to church and things like this, but it doesn't mean that I don't have a very strong spirituality. I really believe that we are, very little beings on this planet, and there are higher forces at play. And so in my practice and my approach of the music, I really think that we are serving some kind of superior purpose when we are learning something, when we are playing something. Like we are, serving the music, serving the beauty, and serving things that are beyond our understanding, but we are still like, serving them to the best of our capacities. That's how, we are never perfect. Like when you have a performance, you are never perfect. Perfection is never attainable, but aiming for perfection is what drives us every day. So there is a lot of faith implicated in this process, I think. And then there is another part in a performance, like when you are really ready to perform, and it's really great to read about Regnier's writing about that too, when she speaks about her attitude towards playing and performing in public in front of an audience. There are some moments in recitals, and those are very rare, that I call moments of grace, where you almost, at least for me, have an out-of-body experience. While you are playing, you feel that the music is kind of taking a hold of you, and it's a moment where you are not really like actively present in the act of playing, and you are more like the music is like taking over. It doesn't last for very long. Like usually these moments for me, it's like a couple of seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds. But these moments, I think, are moments where I don't know what happens, but there is something very deep and spiritual happening in these moments. I don't really want to define them, because I think it's very tough, to find a way to define these things that are beyond us. But yes, so I have a very, in my work with music, I think I am just a small tool who serves a bigger purpose, which is making music and serving the beauty and, giving emotions to people. That's what I feel I am here for.
Yeah, thank you so much for your that personal statement,
Yeah.
Next, they want to know about how were you able to create the sound quality that you had in your videos?
Well, most of it is, I think, my approach of the sound itself. Like, it's
Yes.
I always had luck with my sound. I also think my technique is particularly good at addressing the sound issues. By like my way of plucking the strings is really like something that Germaine Lorenzini taught me when I was in my late teenage years. And so the way you release, it's all about preparing the sound, tensioning the string, and then releasing it in a way that you are not actually articulating too much. You are using the articulation as a way of releasing the string and let it vibrate as freely as possible. That's what puts some air in this, like make the sound vibrate and project also. It's really important for the projection to not really over articulate the string. And so that's the first thing about the sound. Then the second thing, I had to learn for these music videos to record myself in a home setting with a couple of microphones, which is not, it's not easy. So first of all, I invested in good microphones. That's the first thing, AKG microphones. And that's not for every budget. You have to admit that these microphones are a couple of $100 each. It's already an investment. And then well, you need to learn how to position them correctly. So I watched a couple of videos on YouTube to do that. And I had two pairs. So one pair for the close range to get a little more definition and detail, and then a pair that was further away in the room to get more ambience of the room. Because if you only use one pair of microphones, sometimes you get a sound that is too close or too restrained. So I used these two pair of microphones and I recorded on the Logic Pro app. And then you have to work, when you are done with the recording, you have to work on the balance of things. So which part of microphone? So I use more the close one to get something a little more detailed, especially for Rognier, you need a lot of detail and precision. I did a little emphasis on the close couple of microphones. And then you make your balance, so you need to use a tiny bit of like adjustment of the higher pitch and the lower pitch, especially because my home is not this big. And so if you are in a small home, you get a lot of rebounds from the higher frequencies, so you need to kind of cut them a little bit out. So you do what is called your balance, and after that you add a tiny bit, but I didn't want to put too much because then it sounds like you are playing in a Berlin Philharmonie when you are in your bedroom, So I added a tiny bit, but really the minimum I could of reverberation, just to give some warmth, a little extra warmth for this, because a home video is really challenging for that. It's like sometimes it can really sound like the crap because of the room.
Yeah, and again, that's something that we've all had to learn in this quarantine.
Yes.
Absolutely. Just a few more questions for today. Have you ever thought about publishing a book, like a method book? And have you published your paraphrased Sur Carmen piece?
Alors, so it's actually, so it's funny that Jordan spoke about, so I work myself on Finale. I use Finale as a, and I had to learn that too, like I learned that last year, because I wanted to write down this Carmen. So it has been written down, it is not edited yet. I am actually, maybe I should do it with Lionel Healy. I mean, it would be a good thing. So it's ready. Like the Finale file is ready. It can be perfected because I am not a pro of Finale. I have to admit, it's the truth. But so that's done. And then method. Alors, I am always very, especially in today's work. Like I think the Rognier method, for example, it was in our time. It was an amazing book you could have because they didn't have all the means we have today, which are mostly video and things like that. And I think today, if people want to make a method, it would be better to do like video format, but it's very hard also to find a format that is matching with the people are waiting, because you cannot keep the attention span for too long. Like when videos are more than 5 minutes, people are not going to watch it until the end. It's very sad to say, but it's very true. And so doing a whole video on method, I could spend 4 hours on how to play your thumb. So then how can you make that interesting enough, but also not misguiding people in believing that learning the harp is easy? So I have been questioning myself a lot about that. And so I don't think, and I am also not the only one to hit a wall with that. That Marcel Granjani, at the end of his life, he was working on the method with video example, and he let go because he was like, there is not one truth about the technique. So it was, I was saying a little bit in the beginning in my warm-ups, it's like there are as many technical examples as you have pages of music. The way you are going to address one phrase in a Granjani piece is going to be completely different, even if it's a single melody with the sum, that you are going to handle it in a salzedo piece. And this is very true, and Granjani, he kind of let go of the task because he thought it's no point. It's like there is nothing like teaching in person to someone on a specific example to really teach them the best. And I really believe in that. So no method to be made soon, but I am working, and it's going to be maybe for 2022, on an orchestra excerpts book with the rare excerpts, not with the ones that you have the great Sarah Boulens book that already exists that are really amazing for all the aspiring harpists, but I like to also take some much rarer orchestra excerpts, and especially for opera, because I've been playing opera for so long, 15 years almost of my life, that first in Paris, then at the Met for 5 years, and I think there are amazing examples in the opera literature of great excerpts that are completely unknown, and so the idea is to work on a book to publish them with my fingerings and my own take of them, and doing also then small video formats addressing every excerpts, but in a small, in a 5-minute excerpts, to go with the book in a way. I mean, it's going to be on YouTube, but it's going to go with the book. So this is for 2022 because it's taking a lot of time.
Absolutely. I mean, I know that we are all anticipating that, and that's going to be so exciting. I can't speak for Jordan with our publications, but myself, I'm sure Lionel Healy would be excited to publish your Carmen. That would be amazing. So
yeah, really
we'll have
exciting.
to talk. Yeah.
Thank you, John.
Emmanuel, how did you first get involved in playing the harp, and what led you to the instrument?
Yes, I get that often. So I'm gonna give you the spiritual answer today. It depends on my mood. My mother, when she was pregnant with me, she had to lay in bed for 7 months out of 9. Because I was a late bloomer. I came late in her life, and so she had to be very careful during her pregnancy so that I would see the light of day. And during these times in her bed, she listened to a lot of music. And especially, there was this very famous classical recording in France by Erato from the Mozart double concerto with flute and harp, the flute and harp concerto, played by Jean-Pierre Rampal, the flutist, and Lily Laskin, the harp. And this recording, she was really almost religiously listening to it almost every day during this pregnancy. And the truth is, so I am from a non-musical family. None of my parents are professional musicians, but I am from a kind of educated family. They loved classical music. So when I was 6, I started my solfège education, because in France you don't start with an instrument. You usually have 1 or 2 years where you first learn the basis of the solfège. We love theory in France. It's our kind of strong suit. And so during these first years when you are 5 or 6, you listen every week to new pieces of music and you work on them. First you learn to say about what they make you feel, and then you learn also when they were composed and on what subject. I remember the Firebird, for example, was one of them, and when you're a kid, Firebird is such a great story, And at some point, in my 6th year of life, I listened to the flute and harp, I think maybe the first time after I was born. And it's really true that this was a love at first listen. I was really marked by, it was exactly the same version, Laskin, Rampal, and Erato. And after that, I caught myself listening to it almost every day. And so when I was asked a few months later what instrument I would like to pick, it was evident for me that it would be the harp. So I would say the harp picked me, maybe from my time in the womb. You know what I mean? So that's the story.
Oh, that's an amazing story. How great. That's so sweet. Okay, we're gonna end with just a couple more. What's your suggestion for students who are struggling to improve playing as fast as the tempo marked on the music?
Well, it depends on the piece, but my take on that, because my nickname is Speedy Gonzalez, because I play everything too fast, and I used to do it more. Now I am getting old, so I'm starting to slow down. But in my youth, I was really, really mad. So for people struggling to play fast, there is no easy way out of this. The metronome practice is of course important. I think you need to cut and organize your practice sessions, like starting with small cells in the particular passage you are working on, and trying to push them at the final tempo, and if I might say, further fast, like a little faster than your final tempo is going to be. It's really my take on that, because you also have to know that when you are playing through, there is a lot of things that are out of your control, that are lost in the way. So if you only practice with the metronome up to just your final tempo, it's not safe enough. You need to go a little past that. And so start with very small cells, and then integrate just a little moment before and a little after, and then do the same metronome, like slowly rising the speed up to a little further than what you expect, and then like larger sections. It can also be one very difficult cell and another difficult cell later on, and then you do the same, like enlarging the sections progressively until your whole passage is at full speed. But I really, and when I say small cells, it can be half of a bar. Like, it really depends on the technical difficulty you are accounting. But some people, there is nothing more wrong than doing a whole complete section and to push it the whole thing with a metronome from very slow to very fast. You are asking too much of your brain. You really need to cut small pieces. It's really the best way to really use really small cells of music to get them at speed, and then get them broader and finally get the whole passage. But don't start with the whole thing. It's pointless. You are losing hours when you do that.
Oh, I think that's great advice. I'm not a harpist myself, but it sounds really good. Okay, advice on communicating emotion when performing live.
I am not a strong believer in, the body language theory, like some people teach you to do gestures, for me what is important is that you let yourself breathe. And you can hear that in all of my recording, maybe too much, I breathe like a big cow, but what I mean is, like, breathing is important. Not stopping yourself from breathing behind the harp, taking a breath before you start a phrase, before you start a piece. Being present in your body is very important. It's how the music is gonna flow. If your teacher tells you should not move, like, of course if you start doing this and the harp goes everywhere, but there should be no censorship of breathing and moving behind the harp. It's very important that your music is living with you, and for that your breath is really important. So and then about the music expression, to answer about, if you are in the music, your face is going to be active. Your face is going to move. For some, it becomes almost annoying for some people. Like, if you look at the famous singer Cecilia Bartoli, the Italian, like, Baroque specialist, the mezzo-soprano, it's almost painful to look at her face when she's singing, because it moves so much. She's like hyper expressive. It doesn't stop from moving. Maybe some people are thinking it's too much. I say, yes, maybe you think it's too much, but she doesn't control it, and it's what matters. It's like she lets her face express what she has here inside, and controlling that is not good. It's not good. I think you should let it come, and you should not really try to accent it. Sometimes, so I have the case for a few students who have actually problem getting it out. That's a different problem. Like, some people are very reserved behind the harp, and usually it comes from a deeper issue that's more psychological. Is that they are kind of being, on the stage, is kind of being naked. It's showing who you are, what you are at a certain moment of time. And for some people, it's really a breach in intimacy to be doing that on a stage in front of other people. And that's what they need to address. It's more the psychological side of things. Instead of trying to work on some artificial expression they're going to glue on their face at one moment because it seems appropriate. So I would say, be truthful, be honest, and give your heart out when you play, and try not to be too shy. And if you are shy in your daily life, you need to try to work on that also, not overly, but try to accept that when you put yourself on stage, you have to accept this fragility and this breach in your intimacy. It's part of the deal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's part of being a musician, is sharing that music from your heart. And
yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, I know that we all see that in your performance, and I'm sure that's why that question was asked. So that's wonderful. What is your final advice or words of wisdom for harpists and musicians in our last few minutes?
Well, I think maybe I just almost said it partially. Like, to be truthful is very important. To be kind to yourself and patient through your learning process is also very important. Like, I end up in France, you know, we always see the glass half empty. And sometimes it's a great way to get better, because you by chastising yourself, it pushes you to get better. But in the end, it's very hurtful for your psyche, for your way of seeing music. Then you see it as a very negative way of advancing. And in the US, I learned a lot about actually the positive reinforcement. You have great people speaking about that. Like, I think Grace Browning made a video about that, like, and with other young American harpists, speaking about, like the way to be really seeing, instead of like being negative in your judgment of yourself, trying to see the place to improve instead of seeing like what's wrong always. So if I had known that earlier, I think my process in learning would have been a little smoother. Even though, because even still today, I have to sometimes like slap myself on the wrist because I have overly negative. And so, especially after this COVID year, which was so full of negativity for everyone, of fear, of being afraid of, meeting people, communicating with them, staying at home close in a space, for all, I am extending my wishes of courage to all of the students out there that have been struggling in their master's degree or in their bachelor's or in their learning process because there was no auditions coming up or no competitions, or they had to work with a camera, or they didn't have the motivation every day. You have to be kind to yourself. This has been an exceptional year, so difficult for everyone. It's not only you, it's everyone. Give yourself a break. We have brighter days coming up. Just hanging there tight, and yeah, be kind to yourself. Is I think my word.
Absolutely, that's so important.
Can I ask a question really fast, Emmanuel?
Yes, Kat.
I have a question that is a little bit surface, but I don't think we can get away from this without asking. Can we see the t-shirts? Because I don't know about anyone else, but I was in love with the t-shirts.
So this is my shirt with Henriette Renier and harpo marks that I use, for the last piece, the pièce symphonique. It's when he went to France to study with her. He was one of the students Mildred Dilling brought to the US to study with Madame Renier, Mademoiselle Renier, and I think they had a great close relationship. And she went to Etretat. You have other pictures of them being together. So that was one of the shirts. Then there is. I wanted to start like with Henriette Renier as a kid. So that's a picture of her, like a little kid. You can see her heels do not even touch the ground when she's playing. So for the pedal move, it must have been challenging. So yeah, she was like, I think around, it was in her first years playing the harp. So that was the what I wear in the beginning of the video. Then I went to Renier as an adult, like a promotional shot for the transcription work. So that's Renier, I think I would say in her 30s or late 20s. And finally, for the Légende and the Danse des Lutins, I used this great picture of her that I love. It's when she is actually herself playing the Légende, and it was taken at the very end of her life. So yeah, it was to kind of illustrate, this. She has a fierce look on this picture. And so I think it got very well with the Lutin, the Légende, and the Fantastique. So that was the idea. But I had lots of fun doing that, even though it was also a lot of work. But it was a fun process.
I can imagine that we're going to start getting requests for those t-shirts. I'll keep you updated.
Yeah.
And so thank you all again for being with us today. I believe that's the end of our Q&A, our question session. We got to pretty much everything that was asked. And again, for those that didn't get your questions asked, we will be sending an emailed question and answer sheet to you as a registrant. So thank you again. It's been a beautiful day. I hope you have all enjoyed our presentation, and we'll hopefully see you in Chicago here very soon. So thank you
Thank
so
you so
much.
much, Emmanuel. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Lion and Healy. It was a great for giving me the chance and to share my art.
Thank you. Thank you. This has been a pleasure.